You've probably heard about the Second Amendment sanctuary movement going on in Virginia. While it's the counties that are standing up for the rights of their citizens in that state, the Kansas legislature has proposed a bill that would protect the rights of all the citizens in their state. We'll discuss that next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution and teach the rising generation to be free. I am glad you could join me. As always, I'm going to point you to that website, constitutionstudy.com. That's where you can find out everything we're doing at the Constitution Study. Maybe join a webinar, buy a book, just donate, or just spread the word. Anything you can do to help spread this message is greatly appreciated. I do have several events coming up, and maybe you can check out the events calendar. See if I'm coming to a location near you. Or maybe you'll invite me to come to one of your events. You can either have me there in person or over the internet via my webinar service. In any case, the idea is get the message out, help share the message, and help me share the message both with you, your groups, your friends, and your neighbors. So let's talk about what's going on in Kansas. Now, if you went to public school in this country, you should have learned about the checks and balances between the branches of the federal government. Rarely taught, though, is the checks and balances that exist between the federal government and its creator, the states. See, a bill has been filed in both the state House and Senate in the state of Kansas that would be just such a check, not only on the federal government, but on parts of the state government as well. Now, if enacted into law, this legislation would be called the Kansas Anti-Red Flag Act. Now, I haven't compared the language of HB 2425 and SB 245 word for word, but I believe they are very similar. So I wanted to go over HB 2425 with you and see what it actually says. Quote, "The legislature hereby preempts the entire field of legislation in this state concerning in any way federal or state extreme risk protection orders that have been issued against a citizen of Kansas. No city, county, or other political subdivision of this state shall enact any ordinance, resolution, or regulation providing for extreme risk protection orders, nor enforce or aid in the enforcement of any extreme risk protection order issued pursuant to federal law or the laws of another jurisdiction." Now, I'm sure someone will cry foul. They'll claim that federal law supersedes state laws all the time. Well, if they do, I'd guess that they haven't really read Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. Quote, "This Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding." You see, only federal laws made in pursuance of the Constitution are the supreme law of the land. But pursuant doesn't just mean following the process. It means actual following the Constitution. As Alexander Hamilton said, quote, "There is no position which depends on clearer principles than that every act of a delegated authority contrary to the tenor of the commission under which it is exercised is void. No legislative act, therefore, contrary to the Constitution can be valid. To deny this would be to affirm that the deputy is greater than his principal, that the servant is above his master, that the representatives of the people are superior to the people themselves, that men, acting by virtue of powers, may do not only what their powers do not authorize, but what they forbid." So yes, since red flag laws violate all sorts of constitutionally protected rights, they cannot be valid. I've written several articles and recorded several videos on the constitutional violations of red flag laws. Check the link in the description to see some of those. Since both state and federal judges are only bound to federal laws made pursuant to the Constitution, well, the opposite is also true. Judges are not bound to federal laws not made in line with the Constitution. In fact, their oath or affirmation to support the Constitution means they have a duty to reject any law that was not made in pursuance of the U.S. Constitution. This means that Kansas is not only within their rights to not allow illegal laws to be enforced within their jurisdiction, it is their responsibility to protect their citizens from just such laws. Quote, any federal statute, rule, or executive order, federal or state judicial order, or other judicial action that would have the effect of enforcing an extreme risk protection order against a resident of Kansas shall be null, void, unenforceable, and of no effect in the state of Kansas. Such orders shall be deemed to infringe upon the constitutional rights of such residents, including but not limited to the right to due process, the right to keep and bear arms, and the right to free speech. Now, it may be a petty point, but I do have an issue with this particular clause. You see, our due process, free speech, and arms rights do not come from the Constitution, so they are not constitutional rights. They are natural, unalienable rights protected by the Constitution. It is the fact that these rights come from our Creator and not from government that gives Kansas protection of those rights legitimacy. But hey, no one can be perfect. Quote, no state agency or any city, county, or other political subdivision in the state shall accept any monies to implement any federal statute, rule, or executive order, federal or state judicial order, or other judicial action that would have the effect of enforcing an extreme risk protection order against or upon a resident of Kansas. I wrote an article, Another Federal Attempt to Bribe States to Enact Red Flag Laws, that describes just how the federal government uses your tax money to coerce your state to toe the line. I'll put a link in the description as well. Now, I'm glad to see Kansas recognizing this threat to their sovereignty and including protections in this legislation. Quote, for the purposes of this act, extreme risk protection order means an order or warrant issued by a federal court or a state court or signed by a magistrate or comparable officer of the court, including ex parte orders, for which the primary purpose is to reduce the risk of firearm-related death or injury by doing one or more of the following. Prohibiting a named individual from owning, possessing, receiving, or otherwise having custody or control of a firearm, or having a firearm removed or requiring the surrender of firearms from a named individual. If someone has been duly found in a court of law, following the rules of due process, to be a danger to himself or others, HB 2425 would prohibit the issuing of a warrant to confiscate their firearms. Now, this may concern you, but realize that if this becomes law, the only way to handle someone who is a demonstrable threat to others would be to incarcerate them or otherwise restrict them. Let's face it, if someone is a threat with a firearm, they are also a threat with a knife, a car, or just their bare fists. Protecting someone from firearm-related death or injury while leaving them vulnerable to other forms of violence is at best a red herring and at worst a dereliction of duty. Quote, it shall be unlawful for any person, including a law enforcement officer, to enforce or attempt to enforce an extreme risk protection order upon a resident of Kansas. Any person violating this act shall be guilty of a severity level 9 person felony. Now, Kansas wants to put some teeth into this new law. If I understand the Kansas sentencing guidelines correctly, depending on the accused's previous criminal history, a level 9 felony comes with at least a 5 to 7 year prison sentence. Now, before you get all excited about this legislation, remember, Kansas has gone down this road before. In 2013, the Kansas legislature passed, and then Governor Sam Brownback signed the Second Amendment Protection Act. This law stated, quote, a personal firearm, a firearm accessory, or ammunition that is owned or manufactured commercially or privately in Kansas and that remains within the borders of Kansas is not subject to any federal law, treaty, regulation, or federal executive action, including any firearm or ammunition registration program under the authority of Congress to regulate interstate commerce. It is declared by the legislature that those items have not traveled in interstate commerce. This section applies to a firearm or firearm accessory or ammunition that is owned or manufactured in the state of Kansas. Now, this act went on to say, quote, it is unlawful for any official, agent, or employee of the government of the United States or employee of a corporation providing service to the United States to enforce or attempt to enforce any act, law, treaty, order, rule, or regulation of the government of the United States upon a firearm accessory, or ammunition that is owned or manufactured commercially or privately in the state of Kansas and that remains within the borders of Kansas. Violation of this section is a severity level 10 non-person felony. Does that sound familiar? See, back in 2013, Kansas seemed ready to stand up to the federal government for the rights of their citizens. That was until they actually had to do more than just put words on paper. You see, in 2016, the federal government arrested, tried, and convicted 2 men for possession of a firearm suppressor, one of whom was also convicted of the manufacture and sale of said suppressor. And what did the duly elected representatives of the people of Kansas do? Did they defend their citizens? Did they enforce their shiny new Second Amendment Protection Act? No. Then Governor Sam Brownback and Attorney General Derek Schmidt did absolutely nothing to enforce the law they had touted. The only thing these men did was hang out to dry 2 of the citizens that they had sworn to represent. So to the legislature and the governor of Kansas, I say, this is a good start. But until you show you are willing to stand up for the rights of your citizens, to do more than just put words on paper, you have not earned my trust, nor should you have the trust of the people of Kansas. If, however, you enact this law and you actually protect your citizens when they abide by it, I will stand with you and shout your praises from the virtual rooftop of the internet. So what do you think? Is Kansas really going to stand up to the federal government, or will they once again fold like a cheap suit once they're required to put their money where their mouth is? I love it when states stand up for their sovereignty. I hate it when they don't actually do anything. Is this a paper tiger, or is this real? Now, if you live in the state of Kansas, I'd love to hear what you think about this law. I'd love to think what you think your legislatures and your executives will do when this law gets challenged. If you live in the other 49 states, what do you think? Is this the type of law you'd like to see passed in your state? And do you think your state officials would stand up when the feds come shouting and crying? You see, that's what we talk about, checks and balances. It's not just within the federal government. There must be a check on the federal government, and that's supposed to be the states that created it. Kansas is well within their rights to say, no, you cannot enforce an unconstitutional law within our borders. The question is, will they do more than say it? Will they actually do it? So put your comments below. Head over to the website, constitutionstudy.com. Let me know what you think. If you know of other states that are doing similar types of things, please let me know. As always, share the information. Let me know what you think. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it engaging and enlightening. Most of all, I hope you found it worthy to come back next time at the Constitution Study.
Wherever you make your stand, came from